That morning, the market did not sound right. The drums were too soft, the wind too quiet, and even the smell of roasted maize hung differently in the air, heavy, watchful, like the breath before a storm. I remember thinking the day would pass like every other, selling tired vegetables beneath a sun that showed no mercy. But then I saw him, a small boy pushing through the crowd, dragging a woven basket far too heavy for his thin arms, the red thread around its lid glinting like warning fire. When his eyes met mine, the market noise thinned to silence, and a thought whispered through me. Whatever he carries will change everything. Dust clung to my feet as he came closer. He could not have been more than 8, ribs sharp beneath a faded shirt, yet he moved with the calm of someone who had already seen too much. Traders stared, then turned away. One woman muttered a prayer, another spat into the dirt. The boy's shadow seemed to stretch beyond him, long and strange. I told myself to mind my business. Hunger leaves little space for curiosity. But when he stumbled near my stall, the basket tipping, my hands acted first. I steadied it, startled by its weight. "Easy, my son," I said. "Where are you taking something so heavy?" He looked up, eyes dark as river water. "To my mother," he said. "She's waiting. Please, Auntie, help me carry it." There was no begging in his tone, only certainty. The red thread knots wound tight across the lid reminded me of my grandmother's tales, bindings meant to keep spirits still. A chill climbed my spine, but the boy's quiet dignity silenced my fear. I lifted the basket onto my head. It pressed down like a secret. A faint scent of clay and herbs drifted up, earthy, ancient. He turned, and I followed. As we walked deeper into the rows of traders, the market changed. Bargaining voices fell away. Even the goats stopped bleating. People stepped aside without a word. It was as if the air itself had decided to hold its breath. I whispered, "Why do they look at you that way?" "They know my mother," he said. His voice echoed inside me, steady and sad. The sun burned my shoulders, sweat running down my neck, but the basket stayed strangely cool. We passed the spice stalls, usually a festival of color, but today the powders looked pale, drained of life. A trader whispered a name under her breath and quickly turned away. At the far end of the market, the old well waited, its stones green with moss. The boy stopped there. "You're kind," he said. "Not everyone would help me." I forced a smile. "A child should not walk alone. Where is your home?" He pointed beyond the palms. "There. Where she built this place." I frowned. "Who built the market?" "My mother," he answered. "She told me to bring her back before sunset." The words chilled me. "Bring her back." He nodded, eyes glimmering. They forgot her. But she didn't forget them. The basket shifted, though no. Wind blew. My grip tightened. "Obina," I said before thinking. "What's inside?" He blinked. "How do you know my name?" "I don't," I whispered. The name had simply fallen from my mouth. "She told me you would remember," he said softly. My chest tightened. "Who told you?" "My mother, Adaku." The name struck like thunder. Adaku, the woman who once built this market for the poor, who died after a quarrel over land. Some said she was buried beneath the very ground we walked on. Others said her spirit still wandered, counting coins. Before I could speak, an old cassava seller hurried toward us, face pale. "Amaka," she hissed. "Drop that basket. Don't you see? That's Adaku's boy, the one who died with her." I turned to him, but he only watched her kindly. "They forgot her name," he said. "Now they fear it." The basket's weave began to tremble under my palms. I wanted to let go, but it clung to me as though alive. The red thread twitched, loosening. The air thickened, shimmering like heat before rain. "Obina," I whispered. "What will happen if it opens?" He met my eyes, no longer a child's gaze, but something ancient. "Then she will come home," he said, "and she will ask why you broke your promise." The word struck deeper than thunder. Years ago, when Adaku gave me my first stall, I had promised to keep her name alive. But after her death, fear buried that promise. Tears blurred my vision. I didn't mean to forget. She knows, he said gently, but she cannot rest. A wind rose suddenly, swirling dust. The old woman fled, screaming. The basket shook harder, a low hum rising from its core. From within came the scent of rain-soaked earth, and then a whisper, faint but unmistakable, calling my name. The boy's lips curved into a sad smile. "She's waiting for you, Auntie," he said. And as the red thread snapped apart, the lid lifted an inch, and the sound that escaped was not the wind, but a woman's sigh that seemed to rise from beneath the ground itself. Everyone in the market seemed to know something about this boy, except me, the woman carrying his basket. The whispers followed us like ghosts, curling through the air between shouts and footsteps, growing louder the farther we walked. Every glance burned my back. Every murmur carried a name I couldn't catch. And through it all, the boy kept walking, calm, smiling, unbothered, while the weight on my head grew colder, heavier, as if the basket itself was listening. We moved through the thinning crowd, and I began to notice how the market bent around him. Conversations faltered, laughter died, and even the wind seemed to change direction where he passed. It was as if the world recognized him, though I did not. He greeted everyone with gentle respect. "Good morning, Auntie. Good day, Uncle." His small voice floated through the dust like a hymn, too soft for such a heavy silence. Some traders replied weakly. Others turned away, eyes wide with unease. The basket's scent deepened, sweet and floral, but edged with something sharp, something that didn't belong in daylight. I swallowed hard. "Your basket smells strange," he smiled. "Mama liked flowers. She said even poor people deserve beautiful smells." The words stirred something long buried. They were familiar, too familiar. I remembered hearing them once, years ago, spoken by a woman with laughter like bells. I pushed the thought away as the boy continued speaking, telling me about his mother's kindness, her belief that generosity was a kind of prayer. "She must have been a good woman," I said. "The best," he replied. "But people forget good people fast, don't they, Auntie?" The question pierced deep. I thought of Adaku, the woman who once gave me my first stall when I had nothing, and guilt tightened my chest. The farther we walked, the quieter the market became. Only our footsteps remained, the crunch of sand, the faint creak of basket rope. The smell of wet soil replaced the spices and smoke. My skin prickled. Then the boy's hand slipped into mine, small and cold as river stones. "Do you hear them?" he asked. I strained to listen. The whispers were everywhere now, layered and distant, rising and falling like waves. Beneath the murmur, one word repeated itself in different voices: Obina. "Who's calling you?" I whispered. "They're afraid," he said softly. "They remember what they did." His calm frightened me more than his words. The air thickened. The light dimmed, though the sun still shone. When we reached the last row of stalls, half broken and covered in weeds, he stopped before one old wooden beam. Beneath the dirt, faint letters were carved into the wood: Adaku. The name struck like lightning. Memories flooded back. Adaku's laughter, her generosity, the day she collapsed right here, clutching her chest. We buried her quickly, afraid her death would curse the place. We never said her name again. "You remember her," the boy said. I could barely speak. "Your mother was Adaku?" He nodded slowly. "She built this market. She fed everyone. But when she died, they left her here. She said someone kind would carry her home." The basket's weight pulsed like a heartbeat. The red thread trembled. "Obina," I whispered. "What's inside this basket?" He turned, eyes too deep for a child's face. "Mama," he said simply. "She's waiting to see you." I stumbled back. "No, that's not possible." "She said you promised," he continued. "You told her you'd never let them forget her name." The words cut through me like blades. I had promised her that. But fear made us all silent after she died. The air stirred. Dust rose in a slow circle around us. The basket shifted, its lid rattling faintly. "Don't be afraid," he said, his small hand steadying mine. "She's not angry." The scent of flowers grew stronger. Jasmine, roses, and something damp, like rain on old graves. Then faintly I heard it. A woman's voice humming, low and familiar. My heart lurched. It was the same tune sung at Adaku's burial. "Do you hear that?" I asked. He smiled, eyes shining. "She's close." We stepped past the last stall into a small clearing where the earth looked freshly disturbed. The air shimmered with heat and something unseen. The boy stopped. "This is where she waited," he said. My voice shook. "Why bring me here?" "Because you're the only one who remembered her kindness," he whispered. "The only one who can help her rest." Before I could answer, the basket turned ice cold. The red thread loosened, fell away, and a faint glow pulsed through the weave, soft, rhythmic, alive. "Obina," I breathed. "What's happening?" He looked up, smiling through tears. "She's coming, Auntie. You carried her home." He turned toward the far end of the clearing and lifted his hand. Through the shimmer of dust and sunlight, a woman stood motionless, wrapped in white, her face hidden by shadow. The air thickened with the scent of rain and flowers. The boy's voice trembled in reverence. "There she is." For a moment I thought the sunlight itself had taken shape. Everyone in the market stopped mid-motion. The rustle of wrappers, the ring of coins, even the goats went silent, as the figure in white stepped out of the haze. She wasn't just seen, she was felt, like a quiet command that made every heart remember how to beat slower. The boy's small fingers slipped from mine, and he ran forward, calling, "Mama!" My knees nearly gave way. There, beside a polished black car, stood a tall woman wrapped in white from head to toe. Her scarf shimmered, her skin caught the light like warm bronze, and when she opened her arms the air seemed to fold toward her. He leapt into her embrace. She bent, gathering him with a tenderness that belonged to another time. People whispered again, but their voices sounded different now, no longer afraid, only reverent. I stood frozen. The basket I had carried all morning hung loosely at my side, the red thread dull and harmless now. The perfume rising from it, floral, sharp, expensive, matched the scent around her. My throat tightened. When she finally looked at me, it felt like standing under the first rain after months of drought. Her eyes held stories, long days of struggle, nights of loss, and victories no one had celebrated enough. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was low, clear, and certain, the kind that reached both ear and conscience. "You carried what many feared to touch." I tried to answer, but the words tangled. I didn't know who he was." Her smile deepened. "Sometimes we're asked to help before we understand the task. That's how the heart is tested." Behind her, a few traders had gathered, uncertain whether to kneel or flee. One woman gasped, recognizing her face. "It's her," she whispered. "Adaku, the woman who built this place." The name rippled through the crowd. Heads bowed. Even those who didn't know the story felt the truth in the way silence honored her. Adaku turned slightly toward them. "The market is alive again," she said. "That is all I ever wanted." She wasn't a ghost. She was a presence made of memory and strength, the living image of what this place had forgotten. The child beside her, Obina, looked up with the kind of pride children reserve for legends. I stepped forward. "They said you were gone." Her gaze held mine. "Gone? Only those who are forgotten truly disappear. You remembered me enough to act, Amaka. That is why you saw me." Hearing my name from her lips sent a tremor through me. My chest ached with the weight of unspoken regret. Years ago, I had promised to keep her kindness alive, but life and hunger had buried that promise beneath survival. She studied me quietly, then said, The heart that helped me today once received help from me. We are always repaying one another across time. I lowered my eyes. I should have spoken of you more. I should have told them how you started all this. You still can, she said. Every story that is told honestly gives breath back to the dead hopes of others. Her words wrapped around me like prayer. I wanted to ask if the boy was truly hers, if any of this was real, but she turned to Abina first. My son, kindness brought us home. Never forget the woman who carried us. He nodded solemnly. Yes, Mama. Then she looked at me again. And you, don't hide behind fear anymore. You have more power than you think. The crowd had begun to press closer now. Traders, buyers, even children peering from behind stalls. The air felt different, lighter, freer. The basket at my feet seemed ordinary once more, its weight gone, its purpose fulfilled. Adaku reached out and touched my hand. Her palm was cool, steady. Do not mourn what you've seen, she said. Remember it. Let it teach you that generosity never dies. It only waits for someone brave enough to carry it forward. For a long moment we stood like that, two women separated by time, bound by the same dust and struggle. Around us the market slowly remembered its noise, laughter rising again, the scent of roasted corn returning, the sound of life finding rhythm. Her white wrapper fluttered in the new breeze. I noticed now that it wasn't spotless. Faint traces of red clay clung to its hem. Hardship had touched her too, but she wore it as proof, not shame. I finally managed to whisper, "What should I do now?" She smiled. Start again. Build with the same hands that once begged. That is how every morning changes. She turned toward the car, as if to leave, the boy's hand safely in hers. Sunlight glinted on the metal door. My heart thudded in protest. If she drove away now, I might never believe this moment had been real. Just before she stepped in, she glanced back at me. Her eyes held warmth and something like warning. She studied me for a heartbeat, then said softly, "You remind me of myself when I was your age." The world seemed to tilt. The shouts of the market blurred into wind. I wanted to speak, to ask what she meant, but the car engine started, and her white figure shimmered like heat before fading into the light. And that was when I understood. This was not an ending, but a call. I had never imagined that a day born from dust and confusion would end beneath the soft shade of silk, across a polished table where the woman who ruled the market poured tea with her own hands. The same traders who once whispered behind my back now watched from a distance, their disbelief trembling in the air like heat rising from the ground, as I followed her toward the black car that gleamed like quiet thunder beneath the palm trees. Everything about her presence unsettled and humbled me at once. The whiteness of her gown that caught the sunlight like a blessing, the slow grace in the way she moved, the silence that seemed to obey her. And when she turned and gestured for me to sit beside her, I realized that this was not just an invitation from power to poverty. It was a moment that felt carved by fate itself. The tent beside her car smelled of jasmine and warm metal. Inside, the filtered light softened the sharpness of wealth, turning her jewels to water and her presence to calm and authority. She poured tea slowly, her every gesture deliberate, as though control itself had taken human form. I stood uncertain, fingers twisted in my wrapper, until she looked up and smiled. "Sit, Amaka," she said. "Tea tastes better when it's shared." Her tone was warm, not royal, and somehow that frightened me more. I sat opposite her, my pulse louder than the rain that tapped the canvas roof. "You sell vegetables?" she asked, her eyes kind but searching. "Yes, Ma," I said quickly. "Sometimes fruit, enough to feed my siblings." She nodded, her smile faint. "I thought so. Your face carries both hunger and hope. That combination builds worlds." Her words cracked something deep inside me. I hadn't been seen like this in years, not as a vendor, but as a person trying to live. She sipped her tea, then asked softly, "Tell me what your mornings feel like." So I did. I spoke of walking barefoot to the farm before sunrise, of debts and empty nights, of laughter that sometimes hid hunger. She listened without interruption, her attention as steady as her posture. When I finished, she set her cup down. "You already understand what most people spend their lives running from," she said. "That endurance is a kind of wealth." Her certainty disarmed me. I studied her face, the faint scar near her eyebrow, the worn callus beneath her ring finger. She carried beauty the way trees carry roots, quietly, deeply. Then she said, almost to herself, "I once sold vegetables right here too, barefoot. My stall stood near the well." I stared, speechless. "You?" She smiled. "Every stone of this market knows my sweat. I was just another girl with nothing but a dream and a borrowed basket. Sometimes I think the ground still remembers." Her words wrapped around me like music. "People see success," she said, "but never the distance between the first hunger and the first harvest." I wanted to ask how she bridged that distance, but she continued, voice lower now. "One day I fainted from hunger. A stranger helped me, carried my basket, gave me water. Before he left, he said something that changed my life. The world tests those it plans to crown. Don't curse your struggle. Shape it." I built everything from that sentence. The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Outside, the market had begun to stir again. Voices rose, coins clinked, life resumed. But under this tent, time moved slower, like wisdom being poured drop by drop. "Do you believe in destiny, Amaka?" she asked suddenly. I hesitated. "Sometimes it feels like destiny only visits those who already have everything." Her laugh was soft, but certain. "Money doesn't create destiny. Decisions do. And you made yours when you helped that boy today. That single act revealed the woman you're becoming." Her gaze lingered on me, kind but sharp. "I never forgot the man who carried my basket. You remind me of him." I looked down, embarrassed, fingers trembling around my cup. "I was only helping." She smiled. "That's how all great stories begin. Someone simply helping." We sat in silence for a long time, two women from opposite worlds sharing the same warmth, the same quiet. When she finally set her teacup down, the sound of porcelain on wood was small but final. Her posture changed, her calm deepened. She leaned forward, eyes steady and unreadable, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let me tell you," she said, "what that man taught me about destiny." The air seemed to still, every sound outside fading into breathless quiet. And in that pause between her words and mine, I felt the tremor of something greater than luck, something that would soon bind my life to hers forever. The woman everyone admired had once been a hungry child with no shoes and a dream too big for her world. Sitting across from her, the woman who now owned half the market, I listened as the sunlight shifted through the tent, glinting off her bracelets like tiny sparks of memory. Her voice had changed. It was softer now, as though she was peeling back years of silence. And when she began to speak, it felt as if the market itself leaned closer to listen. "I was born with nothing," she began quietly. "Not even enough cloth to wrap my first cries. My mother sold ground nuts. My father never came home from the city. And by the time I turned 10, hunger had already taught me how to smile through shame." I said nothing. Her eyes weren't on me. They were looking somewhere far away, into a past that still breathed in her heart. "One day," she continued, "I came to this same market with a basket that was heavier than I was. It held vegetables I'd picked from a neighbor's farm. My feet were bare, my body weak. The women laughed at me because I stumbled under the weight. I remember thinking, if I fall, I will never rise again." She took a slow sip of tea before continuing. "That was the day a traveling merchant stopped beside me. He was not rich. His clothes were torn, his sandals patched, but his eyes were kind. He lifted the basket from my head without asking, and for the first time in my life, Someone carried my burden without expecting a price. I could see the memory rising behind her words. Her fingers trembled slightly, as if they still felt the weight of that basket. "What did he say to you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She smiled faintly. "He asked me why I cried. I told him I had nothing but this basket, and a dream that mocked me every day. He laughed, not to insult me, but to awaken me. He said, 'Then you have everything, little one. Dreams that hurt are the ones worth carrying.'" Her gaze returned to me, and for a moment I saw the barefoot girl she once was. That man stayed in the village for only a month. Every day, he taught me something new. He showed me how to count coins, how to keep record, how to bargain without begging. He told me that every sale should buy not just food, but a future. The rhythm of her storytelling wrapped around me like music. Even the noise of the market outside seemed to quiet itself, replaced by the soft rustle of her memory. "When he left," she continued, "he gave me 3 things: a notebook, a pencil, and the words I have lived by ever since. Build slow, but build sure." I used that notebook to write down every coin I earned. I saved for months until I bought my own small mat. That was my first stall. From that stall came 2, then 10, then an entire market. Her eyes glowed with pride, not arrogance, but gratitude. "I built this place so no child would ever carry a basket alone again. Every woman who rents a stall here has the same chance I was given. Not charity, opportunity." My throat tightened. The story felt like sunlight breaking through years of cloud. "And the merchant?" I asked softly. "Did you ever see him again?" She shook her head slowly. "No, but every time I help someone stand, I feel his presence. Perhaps he wasn't sent to stay. Perhaps he was sent to remind me what kindness can do." Her words pierced deep. I thought about my own life, the mornings of hunger, the long walks, the hopeless days. Hearing her now, it felt as if someone had taken my pain and shaped it into purpose. "You think I'm special because I have wealth," she said, reading my thoughts. "But the truth is, I only learned to multiply what others gave me. Every kindness you give will return to you in another form, even if years pass between the giving and the reward." Her tone softened even more, almost like she was speaking to the version of herself that still lived inside me. "I see that same strength in you, Amaka. You remind me of the girl who once believed the world would crush her, and instead learned to rise." For a moment I couldn't speak. My eyes burned, my chest tight. It was not just a story, it was a mirror showing me what could be. Outside, the sunlight stretched across the market roofs, the noise of trade rising again. But around us, time felt suspended. She placed her teacup down gently, the sound echoing like a closing chapter. Then she reached across the table and took my hand. Her touch was warm, steady, filled with something deeper than words. "You see," she said, her eyes locked on mine, "a basket isn't just something you carry. It's a symbol of everything that weighs you down until you learn how to lift it right." The truth of it sank through me, like rain through dry soil. Her grip on my hand tightened, and she leaned closer, her voice a whisper that sent shivers down my spine. "Now," she said slowly, her eyes glistening with memory and promise, "it's my turn to carry someone's basket." The words hung between us, heavy, prophetic, and full of meaning I couldn't yet understand. And before I could speak, she smiled, the kind of smile that makes you both grateful and afraid of what comes next. I never knew that a single sentence could bend the shape of my whole life until she looked at me with those calm, unblinking eyes that seemed to see through the dust and hunger clinging to my skin, and said almost tenderly, "Work with me." For a breath, I thought I had imagined it, because such words do not belong in the world of women who count every coin twice. But the steadiness of her gaze, the hush that rolled across the stalls, and the quiet certainty in her voice told me she meant every syllable, And in that fragile pause between disbelief and hope, the market itself seemed to tilt, waiting to see whether I would step forward or run. My mouth opened, but no sound came. She stood beneath the pale awning, sunlight scattering across her bracelets, patience written in the stillness of her posture. When I finally found my voice, it came out thin and trembling. "Madam, you're joking." Her lips curved slightly. "If I were joking, the wind would laugh with me. I am offering you a place beside me. You have something people spend their whole lives trying to buy. Heart." The word heart hung between us, heavy and unfamiliar. No one had ever said it to me as praise. I wanted to tell her I wasn't educated, that my hands smelled of onions, that I was just a girl who survived by guessing the price of hope every morning. But she stopped my protest with one glance. "Courage, first," she said quietly. "Everything else you can learn." Then, before I could gather a single thought, she turned to the crowd. "From today," she announced, her voice carrying like music, "Amaka will work with me. She will learn the business of this market." The sound that followed was not applause. It was shock breathing through 100 mouths at once. Whispers jumped from one stall to another, the way gossip always races ahead of reason. Some faces glowed with pride, others tightened with envy. I felt my cheeks burn, but her hand rested lightly on my shoulder, anchoring me in the storm of voices. "Let them speak," she murmured. "Every beginning stirs noise." We walked together past the line of stalls. People bowed, smiled awkwardly, pretended to rearrange their wares while staring at me from the corners of their eyes. When we reached my old mat of vegetables, she stopped, bent down, and lifted one bruised tomato. "Never forget this," she said. "This is where you learned value. Everything grand begins small and fragile." Her car waited at the edge of the market, engine humming softly. Before stepping in, she turned once more. "Go home early, Amaka. Tomorrow my driver will collect you at dawn. Rest well. You start a new life with sunrise." I stood there long after the car disappeared, my heart stumbling between joy and terror. Around me, the market returned to its rhythm, the clang of metal bowls, the call of traders, the laughter of children. Yet the air felt different, as if it knew I no longer belonged entirely to this world of dust and noise. Voices followed me as I gathered my remaining goods. "Did you hear? Madame Adaku chose her." Another replied, "A miracle. From tomato mat to manager." Their words brushed my skin like heat, but could not reach my thoughts. I was already somewhere else, walking through dreams too large for my hands. The road home was a long ribbon of fading sunlight. Children chased after the wind, goats kicked up dust, and I walked slower than usual, afraid that moving too quickly might wake me from the spell of her offer. By the time I reached my small compound, the sky had turned the color of ripe mangoes. My brother and sister ran to meet me, their laughter still pure, unbruised by struggle. When I told them what had happened, their faces lit up as if I had pulled the moon down for them to play with. For the first time in years, we ate our evening meal with hope as seasoning instead of salt. Later, when the house sank into quiet, I sat by the window and listened to the night breathe. Every creak and distant voice sounded sharper, as though the world wanted to remind me it was still watching. Her words echoed inside me. "You have heart." I whispered them aloud, testing how they felt in my own mouth. They didn't sound borrowed. They sounded earned. Sometime after midnight, just as I began to drift toward sleep, a measured knock echoed through the door. 3 gentle taps that carried certainty. Outside stood her driver, the same man who had opened the car door that afternoon, his uniform crisp even in the darkness. In his hands he held a cream envelope with my name written in bold, careful letters. Inside lay a letter of employment, a notebook for training, and a small stack of crisp notes, my first month's pay, given before I had done a single hour's work. At the bottom of the page, written in her graceful hand, were 7 words that made my heart race. "Tomorrow begins your real education, my dear." I sat there in the quiet, the paper trembling between my fingers, knowing that the market girl I had been would never return unchanged. The morning I began working for her felt like crossing from the world of struggle into the world of possibility. A quiet transformation that began the moment the market's first light spilled across her doorway and revealed an office that looked less like a workplace and more like a sanctuary built from discipline and dreams. The scent of lemongrass mingled with fresh paper. The soft hum of voices outside carried the rhythm of her creation, and standing there, heart racing, I understood that I was no longer merely a vendor, but a witness to greatness, a greatness born not of wealth, but of the rare grace of a woman who had turned hardship into harmony, and who, for reasons I could not yet comprehend, had chosen me to walk beside her in it. She looked up from her desk when I entered, her eyes calm but sharp. "You're early," she said. "Restlessness is good. It means you're awake to your calling." Then she handed me a slim notebook embossed with my name. Inside were figures, lists, and rules. "The market breathes through these pages," she said. "Learn to listen to it." Her office wasn't grand, but everything inside it spoke of order. Bamboo walls, shelves filled with handmade crafts, photographs of smiling vendors. There were no awards, only framed receipts, each one proof of a life changed. Success, she told me later, is not decoration. It's discipline made visible. That first day felt like an initiation. She worked with the grace of someone in prayer, moving through papers and plans like she was conducting music. "Order is respect," she said once. "Respect what you build, and it will grow." My hands cramped by noon, yet I didn't tire. The rhythm of her presence made work feel holy. At midday, she brought roasted plantains and groundnuts. "We eat what our people eat," she said simply, breaking one in half and handing it to me. "If you can't taste where you came from, you'll forget who you are." She didn't teach through lectures. She taught through example. Every gesture, every silence carried a message. When I made an error counting coins, she only smiled. "Precision is gratitude in disguise," she said. When I hesitated to speak to older traders, she whispered, "Age deserves respect, not surrender. Lead, but bow." Each lesson reshaped me. She made me see that leadership wasn't power, it was patience. "Kindness is strategy," she said one evening. "Fear builds walls. Kindness builds loyalty. Choose loyalty." As the days turned into weeks, she began to test me. Small tasks at first. Balancing records, settling disputes, tracing missing stock. Her trust made me brave. The vendors who once ignored me began to ask my advice. I learned to manage conflict, to listen more than I spoke, to lead quietly, but firmly. Sometimes her young son waited by the door, tracing letters in the dust. He would run to me the moment I stepped out. "Auntie Amaka," he'd cry, wrapping his arms around my legs. His laughter cut through the fatigue of every long day. She often watched us from the doorway, a soft smile hiding in her eyes, one that said she was remembering where her own story had begun. Months passed, and I grew into the role she had given me. My handwriting steadied, my confidence deepened. Once, while reviewing the week's accounts, she said without looking up, "Do you know why I trust you?" I shook my head. "Because you still measure value in people, not in profit. Never lose that." Her words etched themselves into me. But beneath her calm, something began to shift. She smiled less, stared longer at papers, her fingers tapping anxiously on her desk. Once I caught her locking a document away and exhaling like someone carrying an invisible weight. I didn't ask. Respect sometimes meant silence, but unease began to follow me like a second shadow. One evening, I stayed late to finish the ledgers. The sky outside was bruised with sunset, traders packing up for the night. Her office was dark. She had already left. I stepped out into the quiet market, the air thick with dust and the smell of oil lamps. Near the back stalls, 2 men stood in half shadow, their voices low and urgent. I paused, listening. One of them said, "If she can't pay the land renewal next month, the council will take everything." The other hissed, "Keep it quiet. Panic will kill the market before debt does." The words struck like cold rain. Land renewal. Debt. My hands tightened around the ledger. The woman who had taught me to master fear, who stood like stone before the world, was standing on ground that might soon crumble beneath her feet. The night wind rose, carrying dust and dread together, and the market lights flickered as if they too trembled with the secret I had just overheard. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes, the kind that power cannot hide, the quiet fear that lives behind calm gestures and measured smiles, the fear of watching something built from love slide toward the hands of greed. She tried to bury it beneath poise, yet every time she looked across the market, her gaze lingered a little too long, as if she were memorizing it before it vanished. The trouble arrived one bright morning in the shape of a black jeep that shone like polished threat. A man in a gray suit stepped out, his smile practiced, his shoes too clean for the dust. He walked straight to her office and said, "Madam Adaku, I want to buy your market." She didn't even blink. "The market isn't for sale." He leaned closer, voice smooth as oil. "Everything has a price." "Not this," she said. "You can buy land, not community." He laughed. "Then I'll take it anyway." When he left, the scent of his cologne lingered like poison. I found her staring at the door long after it closed. "He's planning something," she murmured. Days later, a notice came. Official seal, perfect paper, terrible words. The land now belonged to his company. My heart thudded. "But that's impossible," she sighed. "Power bends truth when it can pay for the bend." She spent the next week with lawyers, councilmen, endless phone calls, outwardly calm, but I saw how her fingers trembled when she thought no one watched. "He forged documents," she whispered one evening. "If I don't prove ownership soon, everything disappears." Her son, oblivious to tension, played at her feet. "Auntie Amaka," he said softly. "Mama hides her special papers in the wooden drawer." Then he ran off to chase a lizard. My pulse quickened. When the office emptied, I opened the drawer. Folders stacked neatly, ribbons faded. One paper caught my eye. Land ownership certificate. Its date was clear and cruel. It would expire in 3 days. I stared until the numbers blurred. If the renewal lapsed, the forged claim would stand. Years of work, hundreds of livelihoods, gone with one missed signature. That evening she found me at the desk. "Go home early," she said gently. "Tomorrow will be heavy." Her smile was brave, but her eyes told the truth. She was tired of fighting alone. When she left, I sat in the half-dark, thunder muttering beyond the roof. I could not let her lose everything she had taught me to protect. I opened the drawer again, lifted the certificate. The paper felt alive, warm from my trembling hands. Outside, the sky split open with rain. I wrapped the document inside my shawl and stepped into the storm. Water rushed along the road, soaking my skirt, stinging my skin, but I kept running. The path to the land registry office lay miles away. If I reached it before dawn, she would still have time to renew. Wind tore through the trees, lightning flared, and the market lights flickered behind me like frightened eyes. My breath came ragged, my shoes heavy with mud, yet in the roar of rain I heard her voice in memory, calm, steady, fearless. "Protect what is yours to protect." I pressed the envelope to my chest and ran harder through the flooded streets, thunder rolling above like judgment. Each step splashed against the weight of the storm, each heartbeat louder than fear. Behind me, the market slept, unaware that its life hung in a single sheet of paper clutched against my heart. And I swore to the night that I would not stop running until I had saved it. The rain that night did not fall. It attacked, roaring down from the heavens like a punishment meant for my courage, drenching the streets until the earth itself seemed to beg for mercy. But even as thunder split the sky and lightning bled across the clouds, I could not stop running, because somewhere behind me stood a woman whose entire life was built on honesty. And ahead of me waited an office where lies were signed into law, and between those two worlds ran only me, barefoot, breathless, trembling, clutching the paper that held her dreams against my chest, as if it were the last fragile heartbeat of hope left in the storm. The road had turned to a river of red mud and rain. My wrapper clung to my legs. My breath came in gasps, but I ran on. The envelope pressed against my chest was already damp, its ink in danger of vanishing, just like her life's work if I failed. The municipal building loomed ahead, gray and lifeless. A guard under a frayed umbrella blocked the steps. "Closed," he said lazily. "Please, sir," I pleaded. "The renewal ends tonight. She'll lose everything." He studied my soaked face, then sighed. "If they ask, I never saw you." He moved aside. Inside, the hall smelled of damp paper and rust. 3 officers sat eating rice, fans buzzing above their heads. I stood dripping before them. "Please, I need this paper stamped before midnight." The oldest leaned back. "System's down. Come tomorrow." "Tomorrow will be too late," I whispered. He shrugged. "Then that's your problem." Another smirked. "Unless you can make it worth our time." "I have no money," I said. "Only the truth." He laughed. "Truth doesn't buy ink." The clock ticked louder than the storm outside. The rain became a heartbeat counting down to failure. Then, from the corner, a quiet voice spoke. "Give it here." A younger clerk rose, his face tired but kind. He wiped the envelope dry, typed quickly. The others mocked him, but he ignored them. The printer sputtered. Lights flickered. I held my breath. 4:57. "Come on," he muttered, hitting the keys harder. The power blinked. Then thud. The stamp fell clean, blue, perfect. That sound felt like salvation. He handed me the paper. "Run," he said softly, "before the rain steals the ink." I ran. Out into the storm again, wind tearing at my shawl, water blinding my eyes. The paper throbbed against my chest like a second heartbeat. Every splash beneath my feet whispered her name. Adaku. Adaku. I pictured her face when she saw the renewal. The relief. The triumph. I whispered to the sky, "It's done. She's safe now." The market lights appeared through the curtain of rain, glowing like hope reborn. My lungs burned. My legs shook. But joy lifted me forward. I had done it. I had saved her dream. Then came the sound. Sirens. Blue and red lights flashed across the wet stalls. People screamed, scattered. I stumbled forward, confusion rising like a tide. The market gates were open. Police trucks lined at the entrance. I pushed through the crowd, clutching the document, rain mixing with tears on my face. Through the storm, I saw her, Adaku, standing between 2 officers, wrists bound in metal, her white gown drenched and heavy against her skin. Her head was high, but her eyes searched desperately for something, or someone. Beside her, the rival businessman smiled beneath his umbrella, calm as poison. Thunder drowned his words, but his triumph was clear. I tried to shout her name, but the storm swallowed my voice. The document slipped in my grip, the ink running like blood into my palms. And in that terrible moment, I realized I had outrun the rain, only to find it waiting for her. With her gone, the market looked lifeless, as if the sky itself had stolen its color, as if every wooden stall, every piece of fruit, every weary trader had suddenly remembered what silence felt like. The ground still smelled of the rain from the night before, but the air carried something heavier than water, fear, confusion, and the hollow echo of her absence. The woman who once turned chaos into rhythm had been taken away in handcuffs, and what remained behind was not a business, but a body without its soul. People whispered in corners. Rumors moved faster than wind. Some said she had stolen money, others that the government had reclaimed the land, and a few, those who feared her strength, smiled in secret triumph. No one dared to stand on her porch or open the doors of her office. I wandered through the aisles of the market, every footstep echoing like betrayal. The stalls stood half empty, the vendors uncertain whether to open or flee. Children who once ran through the paths now clung to their mothers' wrappers. Even the air seemed to wait for a command that would never come. In that paralyzing stillness, her voice returned to me, not from memory, but from somewhere deeper. A whisper threaded through the sound of the wind. Leadership begins when you stand alone. I looked around. The same women who once greeted her with laughter now watched me with pleading eyes. They needed someone to speak. My heart pounded, but the words rose on their own. "She built this place so none of us would ever kneel again," I said, climbing onto an overturned crate. "We will not let her name fall in the mud while she cannot defend it. Open your stalls, work, keep her dream alive." At first, no one moved. Then one old woman nodded slowly, lifting the lid of her basket. Another began arranging yams on a mat. Soon the market hummed again, hesitant at first, then steadier, as if the very act of selling food was an act of defiance against despair. I took charge of the records, collected payments, arranged repairs for broken roofs. When officials came demanding receipts, I faced them with calm they did not expect. "Everything is in order," I said. "You can check." They never did. At night I sat alone in her office, surrounded by her papers, her scent, her stillness. The chair she used remained untouched, the cup she drank from still half full, as if she might walk in at any moment and ask what lesson the day had taught me. Sometimes I caught myself turning toward the door when it creaked, my lips parting to greet her. But only the wind entered. Her son, Obinna, refused to leave my side. He followed me through the market like a small shadow, holding my hand whenever fear found him. One evening, as the sun bled over the roofs, he tugged my sleeve. "Auntie Amaka," he said softly, "you promised Mama you'd help." The words pierced through me. I knelt, pressing his tiny palms between mine. "I will," I whispered. "No one will take what she built." Days turned into weeks. The market healed slowly, like a wound learning to close without forgetting pain. People began to smile again, to laugh softly, to trust the ground beneath their feet. I kept her rules alive. Fairness first. Honesty. Always. When quarrels arose, I repeated her phrases until peace returned. But at night, when the lantern burned low, I faced the truth of what it meant to lead. Every choice weighed heavier. Every coin counted was a promise to her memory. I realized leadership was not glory. It was grief practiced with purpose. One morning, a car pulled up outside the market. Black, unfamiliar. A man in a dark suit stepped out, carrying a leather briefcase. The traders froze. He asked quietly, "Is this the office of Madame Adaku?" I met him at the gate. "She's not here," I said. "I know," he replied. "I'm her lawyer." The crowd gathered as he opened his briefcase and withdrew an envelope sealed with wax. My name was written on it in her careful hand. My heart stumbled. He looked at me solemnly. "She signed this before her arrest. It's a statement regarding the market's future." My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a single letter written in her graceful script. "If you are reading this, it means the world has tested you as it once tested me. Do not be afraid. You are ready." At the bottom, stamped and notarized, were the words that stole my breath. "I hereby name Amaka Chak, the official caretaker and acting head of Adaku Market, until my return, or as long as the community shall trust her." The noise of the market faded into silence. For a long moment I could only stare at the paper, at her signature, bold, unshaken, full of faith. The lawyer closed his briefcase and said quietly, "She wrote it the day before the arrest. She must have known what was coming." The traders stared at me, waiting. Obinna clutched my hand. The letter shook in my grasp, heavy as a crown. And though fear surged through me, another voice whispered inside my heart. The same calm voice that had once taught me courage. "Now it's your turn to carry the basket." When she walked back into the market, it was as if sunlight had finally remembered how to shine, pouring itself over every roof and every stall, waking colors that had dulled in her absence. The sound came first, gasps, then laughter, then a wave of cries that broke through the still morning air as the crowd surged forward, faces wet with tears and disbelief. The woman who had built this place from dust, who had been taken away in shame, now stood at the gate wrapped in light, her head held high, her steps unhurried, the calm of victory resting on her shoulders like a crown only truth could forge. The news had traveled faster than wind. The council had dropped all charges. The rival investor had been exposed, his forged documents traced, his bribes revealed, his power stripped away by the same hands he had tried to crush. The market, once trembling under fear, now roared with life. Drums beat, women sang her name, children danced barefoot through the aisles she had built. I stood at the center, the letter naming me caretaker still folded in my pocket, watching as she walked through the crowd. She was thinner now, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion, but her dignity was untouched. Every trader reached out to touch her arm, her robe, the hem of her sleeve, as if to reassure themselves that she was real. When her gaze found mine, time slowed. For weeks I had led in her name, holding her dream together with trembling hands. Now, seeing her return, all the strength I had borrowed from courage turned suddenly into tears. I stepped forward, my heart both breaking and healing at once. She smiled. "You kept the market breathing," she said softly. "You taught me how," I managed to whisper. She reached for her son next. Obinna ran into her arms with a cry that silenced even the drums. She lifted him, kissed his forehead, and for a long moment mother and child became one image of everything we had fought for: love, survival, legacy. Then she turned to the crowd. Her voice, though not loud, carried through the air like music. "My people," she began, "truth does not always walk fast, but it never loses its way." A murmur of agreement swept through the market. "They said I stole what I built. They said this market belonged to another. But you cannot steal what was born from sweat and kindness. You cannot forge community." Applause erupted. Some women shouted her name, others simply wept. She raised her hand for silence. While I was gone, someone stood for me. Someone carried not only my work, but my hope. My knees went weak as she turned toward me. "Amaka, come." I hesitated, stunned, but the crowd parted, urging me forward. She took my hand, lifted it high before everyone. "This young woman carried my son's basket," she said, her voice thick with pride. "And now she has carried my heart." The market exploded with applause. Women ululated, men clapped their hands above their heads. Some called my name, others shouted hers. But in that moment, names no longer mattered, only what we stood for. I felt her fingers tighten around mine, steady and sure. She continued, "Leadership is not given. It is earned through service. And today, I declare that every woman here shall have the right to lead, to own, to dream beyond survival. No more fear, no more silence. We build together." The roar that followed was unlike anything I had ever heard. It was not noise, it was history taking a breath. Traders hugged one another, tears mixing with laughter. Even the elders who rarely showed emotion wiped their eyes. For the first time, the market didn't feel like a place of trade. It felt like home, reborn. Later, when the celebrations had quieted into songs, she pulled me aside to her office, the same small space where I had first seen her pour tea with grace and power. Dust motes floated in the golden afternoon light, and the familiar scent of lemongrass filled the air again. She sat, gesturing for me to do the same. "I heard how you stood before them," she said, her voice low but steady. "How you calmed the people, how you kept the books clean. You proved that leadership is not about inheritance, but about intention." "I only did what you would have done," I replied. She smiled gently. "That's how legacy works. It multiplies itself through those who believe." We sat in silence for a moment, listening to the faint hum of the market outside. It sounded alive again, whole again. The fear that had haunted it was gone. Finally, she turned to me, her eyes glimmering with the same quiet fire I had seen the day we first met. "I built this market to give women a place to rise," she said. "Now I want you to build yours." My breath caught. "Mine?" She nodded, leaning closer. "Yes. Your own. Not as my shadow, but as my equal. You've already proven you can lead when everything falls apart. Imagine what you can build when the world stands with you." I stared at her, my throat tight with emotion. "I don't know if I'm ready." "No one ever is," she said softly. "But that's when destiny begins." She reached across the table, squeezed my hand, and whispered, "Now it's your turn to build your own market." The words settled inside me like an echo of thunder that promised rain. Outside, the drums began again, the traders' voices rising in a chorus of joy, and I knew that while her story had returned home, mine had only just begun. Years later, I stood before a new market, a place born not just of wood and iron, but of memory, faith, and lessons that had once been whispered to me beneath the shade of another woman's strength. The morning sun spread its gold across the rooftops, glinting on the tin signs and bright fabrics, touching every stall like a blessing passed down through time. Around me rose the laughter of vendors, the chatter of children, the smell of roasted maize and new beginnings. It was not the same market I had once fought to save. It was the child of that dream, shaped by everything she had taught me, proof that the seeds she planted in me had found their own soil to bloom. We called it Unity Market. It stood at the edge of the old road, where travelers still told stories of the woman who built her empire from a single basket. The place pulsed with life. Stalls lined the streets in bright colors. Women sold yams and peppers beside men who fixed radios or carved spoons. Children darted through the aisles, carrying baskets almost bigger than themselves, their laughter rising like song. Everywhere I looked, I saw her fingerprints, her philosophy woven into the rhythm of trade. Prices were fair, rules clear, respect mutual. The office that oversaw it all was open air, built of bamboo and clay, simple but strong, the way she had taught me. I insisted every stall carry a small inscription burned into the wood. Kindness is the first currency. The grand opening drew hundreds. Traders arrived dressed in their best wrappers. Elders from nearby villages came to give their blessings. And then, just before the ribbon was cut, a hush fell across the crowd. A black car rolled to a stop at the gate. When the door opened and she stepped out, time folded in on itself. The same grace, the same white elegance. Though her hair now shone with silver and her walk was slower, her spirit filled the air like a familiar melody. The market she had once built was thriving again under others, but this one, mine, was new, and yet it belonged to her too. She looked around with quiet wonder. "You built this," she said when she reached me, her eyes glistening. "I only gave you a basket." I smiled through the emotion tightening my throat. "You gave me a life." The crowd clapped as she took the scissors, and together we cut the ribbon. Cheers erupted. Drums rolled. The air filled with singing and praise. I watched her as she moved among the stalls, vendors rushing forward to greet her, some kneeling, some crying, all calling her name. Madam Adaku, Mama Market. She stopped at one table where her son, now a tall young man in his 20s, stood waiting with a bouquet of flowers. "For you, Mama," he said, smiling. "You taught us what strength looks like." She hugged him, tears slipping freely down her cheeks. "And you remind me why it was all worth it," she whispered. I watched them and felt my chest swell with gratitude, so deep it hurt. Everything had come full circle. The child she once carried, now grown. The woman she once lifted, now leading. The community she once saved, now flourishing. Later, she stood beside me on the small platform overlooking the stalls. "Do you know what I see when I look at this place?" she asked softly. "What?" "A story that never ends," she said. "Kindness always continues in someone else's hands." Her words sank into me like sunlight into soil. I looked down at the crowd, women teaching other women to read numbers, children laughing, a man teaching his apprentice how to carve prices into wood. It was more than a market. It was a movement, a living inheritance. As the sun began to set, turning the roofs copper red, I felt a tug on my skirt. A small girl stood there, holding the edge of a basket too large for her little arms. Beside her, a younger boy tried to lift it, failing with a frustrated sigh. Without a word, the girl bent down, slid her hands under the handle, and together they began to carry it. The sight stopped me cold. The echo of another morning, dust, exhaustion, a small boy, a heavy basket, rose inside me. And suddenly the years folded back to where everything began. She followed my gaze and smiled knowingly. "You see," she whispered, "the story always finds a way to repeat itself." The drums softened, the crowd's song rising into the fading light. For the first time, I didn't feel the weight of her legacy as a burden, but as a bridge, one I had already crossed, one that now stretched beyond me to others who would carry it next. As the children disappeared into the sea of laughter, their small basket swaying between them, I felt the wind brush against my cheek like her blessing and whispered to myself, because sometimes the weight you carry for a stranger becomes the bridge to your destiny. If this story touched your heart, don't just leave quietly. Leave your thoughts below. What would you have done if you were in Amaka's place that morning? Subscribe and join me for the next chapter of courage, kindness, and destiny from the heart of Africa. Because every story we share keeps our roots alive, and your voice is part of that story.